What if I told you that one of the most feared mob bosses in American history once worked with the US government, and not just to make a few bucks, but to help win World War II? Sounds like a bad movie plot, right? But this one's real. By the end of this video, you'll know how Charles Lucky Luciano went from a prison cell to cutting a secret deal with US naval intelligence, protecting America's ports from Axis sabotage, and rewriting the rulebook for how deep the Mafia's influence could reach. And somewhere in this story is a question you've got to answer. Was Lucky Luciano a patriot, or just the smartest gangster in the room? Before we get into it, you're watching a new channel that's building a family of people obsessed with real Mafia history. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Every click helps me grow and keep bringing you stories you won't hear in school, the news, or even most books. So go ahead, join the family. Now, let's get into it. It's 1942. The United States is deep into the war. The bombing of Pearl Harbor has America in full military mobilization, and the fear of sabotage on home soil is real. German U-boats are prowling the East Coast, sinking ships, and rumors are flying about enemy agents slipping into New York Harbor to cripple supply lines. The docks are a lifeline. Without them, troops overseas won't get food, weapons, or reinforcements. But there's a problem. The New York waterfront is a jungle, and not the kind you send Boy Scouts into. The docks are controlled by the International Longshoremen's Association, and that means they're controlled by the Mafia. From Brooklyn to Staten Island, every crate, every cargo manifest, every man working the pier answers to the mob. And no one, not even the US Navy, can move in without paying respect. Now here's where things get interesting. The Navy had a real problem. They knew they couldn't just storm the docks and start barking orders. They'd be ignored at best, and shot at worst. So naval intelligence started looking for someone who could open doors that were otherwise locked. That someone was doing time in Dannemora prison, way up in the frozen north of New York State. Lucky Luciano had been behind bars since 1936, serving a 30 to 50-year sentence for compulsory prostitution charges, a conviction that was, let's just say, creatively prosecuted by Special Prosecutor Thomas E. Dewey. But prison hadn't erased Luciano's power. From his cell, he still had influence on the street. His old crew was loyal, his lieutenants were active, and when Lucky sent word, people still listened. From my perspective as a historian, this is where you see the real depth of Luciano's reach. Most mob bosses lose their grip after a year or two inside. The street moves on, alliances shift, and new players take over. But Luciano wasn't just another boss. He was the architect of the commission, the man who structured the modern American Mafia. His influence wasn't tied to one block or one racket. It was woven into the system itself. The Navy knew this, and they knew they had no other option. Through a series of intermediaries, most notably Meyer Lansky, Luciano's old friend and partner, naval intelligence reached out. Lansky had kept his hands clean in the public eye, but behind the scenes, he was still very much in the game. The pitch was simple: we need to secure the docks, we need your help to do it. But Luciano wasn't about to just give away favors. No, this was going to be a transaction. And here's where the story takes a turn most people never hear about. The actual negotiation was like something out of a noir film. Government agents met with Lansky in quiet hotel rooms, back tables of high-end restaurants, and even on yachts moored just far enough offshore to be private. Every meeting ended the same way: we can get Luciano to cooperate, but what's in it for him? The answer, as history shows, was freedom, or at least a shortened sentence. Luciano's people made it clear he'd helped the Navy secure New York Harbor, but when the war was over, he expected the state to revisit his conviction, and so Operation Underworld was born. Officially, it didn't exist. There was no paperwork, no memos stamped top secret sitting in filing cabinets. The Navy didn't want a public scandal about working with the mob, and the mob didn't want its reputation as untouchable businessmen compromised by being seen as government helpers. This was a handshake deal, except the handshake was between some of the most dangerous men in America and the United States military. The first step was subtle. Luciano didn't send word from prison to cooperate with the Navy. That would have been suicide for his reputation. Instead, the instructions to his men were wrapped in coded language. Make sure the piers are clean. No fires, no trouble, no strangers. In mob speak, that meant the docks were now under a kind of quiet martial law. Anyone who didn't belong was either turned away or handled before they could cause real trouble. And it worked. Almost overnight, the reports of dockside sabotage and suspicious activity dropped to near zero. German agents who had been testing the security of New York's waterfront suddenly found it was a closed shop. If they weren't killed outright, they disappeared into the kind of silence only the mob can arrange. From my perspective as a historian, The beauty of Luciano's play here is that it cost him nothing and gained him everything. He didn't have to move an army, just whisper to the right captains, who in turn whispered to the right foreman, and the machine took care of the rest. No paper trail, no public alliance, just results. One of the most fascinating and rarely discussed parts of this story is how far the cooperation went. Luciano's people didn't just lock down the piers. They actively worked with naval intelligence to identify and neutralize threats. Informants who under normal circumstances would never speak to the government suddenly had anonymous tips about suspicious cargo, shady characters or foreign-looking vessels docking without proper paperwork. Lansky, ever the diplomat, became the unofficial go-between. If the Navy needed something, they went through him. If Luciano wanted to send a message back, it went through Lansky. This layer of insulation kept both sides comfortable. The Navy could deny any direct contact with Luciano, and Luciano could maintain the image that he was simply protecting his interests. Now, here's a part most history books skip. This wasn't purely about patriotism or even a deal for freedom. Luciano saw the war as an opportunity. By securing the docks, he was tightening the mob's grip on one of the most lucrative rackets in America. The longshoremen, the trucking, the stevedores, all of it was under mob control. And with the Navy effectively blessing this control by working with him, Luciano's position was stronger than ever. But it wasn't without controversy. Inside the mob, not everyone liked the idea of helping the government, war or no war. Old-school bosses, especially those tied to Sicily, hated the thought of cooperating with outsiders. Luciano's answer was simple. This is business. You want to make money when the war's over, then we make sure there's still a port to work in. In other words, think long-term. For viewers watching right now, what do you think? Was this a shrewd business move, or was Lucky crossing a line that should have been untouchable? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to see where you stand. By late 1943, Operation Underworld had done its job. The docks were clean, the sabotage scare was over, and the Navy was pleased. And true to their word, naval intelligence put in a quiet recommendation to New York state authorities. Luciano had been helpful in securing the nation's war effort. The result was historic. In 1946, after serving just 9 years of his 30 to 50-year sentence, Lucky Luciano was released from prison with one condition: immediate deportation to Italy. This is where you see the double edge of Luciano's deal. On one hand, he was free, walking out of a maximum security prison years ahead of schedule. On the other hand, he could never legally set foot in the United States again. The country he had ruled from the shadows was now out of reach. But if you think exile meant retirement, you don't know Lucky. From Naples, he set up shop again, acting as a liaison between the Sicilian Mafia and the American families. He was still pulling strings, still making deals, still running rackets. Only now the Atlantic Ocean was his chessboard. And here's the irony: while Operation Underworld is often painted as a secret wartime success story, it also strengthened organized crime's hold on the docks for decades to come. By legitimizing the mob's control during wartime, the government had essentially made them part of the infrastructure. For Luciano, that was the ultimate victory. He'd gone from inmate to indispensable ally of the United States Navy, and in the process ensured that the Mafia's influence on the waterfront would outlast the war itself. In the years after his release, Luciano became something of a ghost in American organized crime. Not physically present, but still casting a long shadow. He lived in luxury in Naples, often entertaining American mobsters who flew in on business. Meetings were held in hotel suites, private villas, and occasionally aboard ships that docked long enough for a handshake and a sealed envelope. One little-known detail: Luciano used his exile to rebuild old-world connections. He strengthened ties with Sicilian bosses who had survived Mussolini's brutal fascist crackdown in the 1920s and 30s. Many of these men had been political prisoners during the war, and were now eager to get back into business. Luciano, with his American contacts, was the bridge between two worlds, an international broker of crime. From my perspective as a historian, this is where you see Luciano's true genius. Most bosses rise and fall with their local power base. Luciano had created a system that didn't require him to be on American soil to function. He was in effect running a multinational corporation long before corporate globalization became a thing. But the freedom of Naples came with its own dangers. Law enforcement in both the US and Italy kept tabs on him. American agents would show up in cafes where Luciano was known to sit, just to remind him that his movements weren't invisible. Italian authorities, pressured by the US, would occasionally detain him for questioning, hoping to catch him in the act of organizing a drug shipment or smuggling operation. And that brings us to one of the most controversial claims about Luciano's post-war life: his alleged role in the heroin trade. While some law enforcement sources insist Luciano was a major player in moving heroin from Turkey through Italy and into the US, Luciano himself always denied it, saying he had no interest in drugs. Even among mob historians, this is debated, and the truth may be somewhere in between. What's undeniable is that his wartime cooperation with the Navy gave him a kind of untouchable aura for a while. No prosecutor wanted to be the one to drag the patriot gangster into court on shaky evidence. And within the mob, his status as the man who made the commission and struck deals with world powers cemented his place as one of the most respected and feared bosses in history. In January 1962, Luciano's story came to an abrupt end. At Naples airport, just after meeting with a movie producer about a possible film on his life, Luciano collapsed from a heart attack and died. He was 64. The funeral was held in Naples, but the real spectacle happened in Queens, New York, when his body was returned to be buried in St. John's Cemetery, the same resting place as many other mob luminaries. Thousands turned out to pay their respects, from old associates to curious onlookers. Even in death, Lucky drew a crowd. So here's the question: did Operation Underworld make Lucky Luciano a patriot, or did it simply prove that in the world of organized crime, the smartest move is always the one that serves both sides of the table? I know where I stand. From my perspective, Luciano's genius wasn't just in making money or eliminating rivals, it was in seeing opportunities where no one else looked. In the middle of a world war, locked in a prison cell, he found a way to make himself indispensable to the US government and use that to secure his freedom. What about you? Was he a necessary evil, or just evil with good timing? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your take. And if you've been with me for the whole story, you're officially part of the family. Hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share this video with someone who loves true Mafia history. We've got plenty more untold stories coming, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's next.